What's up gamers, DreamcastGuy here, reviewing today the Mega Man X Legacy Collection 1 and 2. If you talk to anybody today who grew up in the 90s, you're probably going to hear them mention at some point the name Mega Man. These games have taken on many different forms and have gone from being loved to hated in different iterations, but personally, something that always kind of gleamed in my mind as being the best of the best are the moments that happen during the X series. Each one of these has sort of a similar pattern of having you playing a superhero taking on 8 evil robots, but what made them really charming is the fact that they slowly evolved over time. From their early roots, they're actually quite straightforward. They're just about action dashing, memorizing enemy patterns, and getting new unlockables, making it where you become strong enough to defeat the last boss. But something that's always been fun the most is that as the games went on, they not only got harder, but they sort of introduced new elements that other series kept trying to copy and couldn't, because only in the Mega Man X series were they perfect. Let's take a look through this entire thing and try and answer the question, is this worth your money? And I have to say that up front, it probably is, even if you're not normally a fan of this style of gameplay, because here we're seeing the best version of some games that are already nearly flawless. This game overall is broken down into two separate halves, Collection 1 and Collection 2, being the first 4 games and the second 4 games in the X saga. Now, I really want to focus on them separately because the first 4 games are so dramatically different from the later half. So let's talk about the originals, which is the first games that started coming out back on the Super Nintendo. X1, 2, 3, and 4 are incredibly straightforward. They're things that as soon as you look at are very simple. In fact, these games don't even have a tutorial. They trust you, the player, to be dropped into these maps and figure things out completely on your own with no instruction. Things like wall jumping, charging up attacks, and learning to slide under special moves. You really kind of just get taught by doing it, and that's part of the reason I love them so much. Even in Mega Man X4, when they introduced Zero as a playable character and you're sliding around and using his sword, they don't bother trying to tell you how to do things, they just leave you to do it on your own, and that's why these are really my very favorite games. I will admit that some of them are a little bit too hard for me, especially Mega Man X3, which can just be absolutely brutal at times, but even for people like me, who aren't exactly the most skilled at this franchise, now have a way to complete these, which is with a newly introduced element that's been put into this collection, which is easy mode. Okay, I'm sure you're gonna laugh at me, but I do think that this being added in here is quite cool. Basically, whenever you want, you flip it on and it makes it where you take dramatically less damage and deal slightly more damage. It basically creates a buffer to make it where, if you want, you can create a save file and then try a boss over and over again in easy mode, learn their patterns, and then, if you want to beat them legit, go back and try them again. This is something I'll fully admit that I did a couple times, because some of these people, when you first go against them, you don't know what to expect. Their moves are so different that trying to just figure it out on the fly can be a little bit difficult if you want to try and avoid watching like a YouTube video that shows you how it's done. I found it so addictive and fascinating to get to go into this world and try and just be tested by fire. Going in here and seeing all the different bosses and beating them in any order I like and not worrying about trying to follow a strategy guide, especially when things went on to the Mega Man X 5, 6, 7, and 8, the Legacy Collection 2. These ones are much weirder and in some aspects not quite as good. While I do like that 5 and 6 started introducing more story elements and trying to build out a larger plot to this game, it still feels a little bit odd. I do like that these games still stick to the original art style. They very much feel like the original Mega Man X game, just with weirder bosses and bigger moments that are taking place. It's when you start to get into 7 and 8 that things truly went off the rails. Here, I believe the developers were trying to see how far they could push the limits of what we thought of a Mega Man X game. These have weird parts where you're in 3D environments or fighting bosses that actually can phase in and out of the background, even though you're technically in a 2D space. While interesting, it's hard to say that these games are great. They are good, and I think the experimentation they did in them is something that's very admirable, but they're not super fun. In fact, a couple times I would turn on easy mode and just kind of blow through these. That way I could see all the cool cutscenes and see how the new special moves worked, but they just weren't exactly as great as the earlier games, which were so tight. Part of the reason this sort of hurts the later games is they started introducing tons of extra characters and moves like being able to swap out different combatants in the middle of a level, and then making it where you needed to have a particular character to do certain moves. This is just a big change that I don't think anybody in the fan base was really in love with, because clearly they decided to go back to its awesome 2D roots in the end. But now, having all of it together on one collection is quite stupendous. I did like seeing how these games slowly morphed and changed over time, and I sort of gained a better respect for it because I can see what they were going for. When you see every single one of these games and beat them in the correct order, you sort of see what they were trying to get at. And once you're done with that, you can do something that's truly awesome and probably the very best thing about this game, which is the new mode. Something that lets you go and boss rush. You get to take on all the different bosses in all the games, but here's the thing, it's not one-on-one. It is two-on-one. You'll fight two bosses from different Mega Man games who are teaming up to try and take you down. In order to make this more of a fair fight and more possible to win, you're allowed to select some random skills from the different games to make it where maybe you have the Sting Shot from Mega Man 1 and a big shield ability from Mega Man 4. This is so cool because depending on what you use, it gives you an opportunity to do more damage because you're targeting somebody's weakness, or possibly just make skills that'll make it where you're actually trying to slow them down. Or the whole thing that's the most fun to me is that you can't really be fully prepared for what you're getting into. These guys a lot of times are basically built to try and take you down quick. They definitely chose bosses that complement each other's skill sets, and it really was kind of thrilling to see bosses that I'd already conquered once, twice, or even 5 times suddenly working together to take me down. It was so freaking exciting because it's something I've never seen before throughout the entire series. And as you get further, they actually throw you into tougher, more impossible matches until eventually you're fighting multiple final bosses simultaneously. It's so exciting every single time I dropped into the arena, and the fact that there's an online leaderboard to make it where I can actually show off the points I've gained by beating these bosses, it makes it where I keep wanting to challenge myself to get a little bit further and do a little bit better. The only other thing that really stands out as being very unique is in these collections, on top of the boss mode and the easy mode, they've thrown in a bunch of concept art and cool commercials. You can actually watch a lot of the original advertising for these games and see how they were marketed. It is also kind of fun to just kind of leaf through some of these early drawings and see what this character was first coming along as. This to me is cool, but not exactly a must-buy quality. It's something that definitely threw in there to try and reward the existing fans with a never-before-seen look at this franchise. To me, though, I'm just in love with the fact that I have 8 full games all on one disc, and getting to go through it all was so freaking riveting. It kind of gave me a much deeper appreciation for this series and seeing how it rose and fall, because let's face it, while people do love these games, they definitely sold worse and worse as time went on, and it's so cool to finally see it all packaged together to give people who may not have been on board from the very start a chance to see this amazing saga from start to finish. Okay, now I want to do something a little bit different. Typically at the end of my reviews, what I say is, okay, we've heard some good and some bad, but let's over to the ratings board and put a big number on it. But for this review, I want to do something slightly different. Since Legacy Collection 1 and 2 can be sold separately, and they are quite different, I want to rate them separately. For the Mega Man X Collection Legacy 1, I am going to give it a 10 out of 10. All four of these games are perfection, and the boss rush mode definitely gives it a fun added twist. But for Legacy Collection 2, I'm instead going to be giving this an 8 out of 10. They are still great, and the early ones are flawless fun, but I think the later games just don't hold up quite as well. So together, I am giving the grand total Mega Man X Legacy Collection 1 and 2 a 9 out of 10, a good average for games that manage to age so wonderfully. Thanks so much for watching, gamers. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, share with your friends, and subscribe if you haven't already. But do me the biggest favor of all and keep dreaming. Oh, hi. I'm just working on the next video. If you want to see what it is, go ahead and click this button and you can subscribe. Also, if you click these video links, you can see my latest review and my latest top 10. Now I'm just going to sit here for a minute and wait for you to subscribe. Oh, I guess I could put on these giant glasses. I literally found these on a roller coaster.